Ignite to impact.
Do you ever feel not good enough at work? In today's conversation, we're going to explore this phenomena of imposter syndrome and how it shows up at the workplace. How you doing, y'all? I'm Dr. Geneva, and welcome to Ignite to Impact Live, the best place for conversations about inspiring the next generation of leaders at whatever age you are. I'm so delighted you're joining me live or on the replay. And if you've been following this series, we're looking at the phenomena of imposter syndrome. Now, this is one of the most annoying conditions you'll ever experience in life. And worse yet, the odds are fairly good that you will have a taste of this imposter syndrome sometime in your life, whether you're a man or a woman. And in fact, the latest stats show that up to 80% of us can experience imposter syndrome at one time or another. And typically, this phenomena is defined as these feelings of self-doubt, unworthiness, feelings of unease and anxiety, and also feeling that we're just not good enough in whatever situations we are. Well, these conversations that we're having about this, I'm just determined that we're going to defeat imposter syndrome. We're going to defeat doubt and really overcome this condition, which again, so many of us will experience. So, I've put together these three conversations. And the first conversation, which you can check out if you haven't already seen it, dealt deep with what is this phenomena. And we talked about these feelings of unease, these crippling self-doubt thoughts, and how it affects men and women and so many people. So you can watch that replay on this LinkedIn stream. Today, we're going to look at how imposter syndrome shows up in the workplace. And there have been a lot of conversations about, working and how this affects you at your job and working with others. So we want to dive into that. And then the third conversation is going to be on solutions. Now, throughout these conversations, we do give you tips and advice and all of that about how to overcome imposter syndrome. But in the third session, we're going to dive real deep, so deep that you definitely need to pull out your paper and some pencil and, just be writing and taking down notes. That'll be the third session. And so let me just set the context a little bit about this imposter syndrome at the workplace. One of the writers that I follow, two writers, Rashida Toulson and Jodi Ann Burney, in their book, Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome, that appeared in the Harvard Business Review. One of the things they talked about is that what's less explored in this conversation about imposter syndrome is why this phenomena exists in the first place and what role workplace systems play in fostering and exasperating it, particularly in women. And then the authors go on to say that they believe that the conversation about imposter syndrome lacks the focus on systemic racism, classism, ageism, etc. So they believe that the conversation about imposter syndrome phenomena should be focused on the isms that are out there, and how that in fact affects us as individuals, as opposed to placing all of the emphasis on what we as individuals need to do to get rid of our doubt or self-doubt. Now, I happen to believe that both perspectives work and both perspectives are good. And that's what we're focusing in on these series of conversations. And so now I want you to know that I'm not doing this, having this conversation with you alone. If you watched our first segment, you know that I'm joined by Therese Peace Agbo, executive leader, attorney, executive coach. She's just phenomenal, and she has been in her field for 25 years, having that leadership experience, and she served in a variety of senior human resource management roles. She's presently vice president of talent and culture at Kirko. Hey, Montez. How you doing? I'm so glad you're joining me for this conversation. I want you to know that Therese has also her own consulting company right now, TM Pierce and Peace and Associates, and she is the bomb, and she just has so much executive experience. She's been a senior officer with Signature Technology Solutions. She's responsible currently for talent recruiting, training, development, culture. So she's seen it all at the workplace. And I just thought she'd be a fabulous guest to have this deep conversation. She's recognized by Corp Magazine as the diversity business leader and as a leader in diversity and inclusion. And that's why I thought she would be a perfect person to have this conversation about how does imposter syndrome show up at the workplace, and what's the intersection between this conversation, this increasing conversation on diversity, inclusion, and equity in the workplace, and imposter syndrome. So I want to know if she's with us now. Can we bring her on? Yes, Therese, how are you?
Hello.
Okay.
I'm good, Dr. Geneva. How are you? Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. You know, earlier on we had some technical challenges, but you know, what is a live show without some technology issues? I mean, you know, it's just like you really can't have a good conversation unless you have that. Well, I am so glad you're with us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful, and I am happy to be here with you. So
Good.
Glad that we have resolved our technology issues this morning.
Great. Thank you. And Montez, I want you to drop in any comments you and others might have. Please do. We're delighted you're with us. So Therese, let's jump right in. And, you know, I want to start off the conversation by doing some level setting so that we're at the same point. I talked about imposter syndrome and tried to define it a little in terms of this feeling of unease, doubt that you have, that you're not good enough in whatever setting you might be in. And we, of course, are going to focus today on how imposter syndrome shows up on the workplace. But we also want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'd like you to kind of help us level set by, you know, what is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why does it matter?
Well, so diversity, equity, inclusion is just that. And so it's really making sure that for any organization that you have a diverse population there's representation across all ethnicities and cultures and so forth. It's also, making sure that there's equity. One of the things that happens, if you think about men, women, a lot of times there have been pay disparities. And so making sure that there are equitable practices in the workplace, and then that we are inclusive of who we are. What it's not is affirmative action. And that's what a lot of times people think of when they hear diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not affirmative action. Affirmative action is a legal program that was put in place. It's really checking a box to say that, we have done hiring within certain cultural groups. But diversity, equity, and inclusion is really, it's a process. It's how you live. It's how you work. It's the things you should be bringing in the workplace. And when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion and imposter syndrome, how might that show up? I think it shows up in really two components. It's the self component, how you're showing up. And it's also from an organizational standpoint, how does an organization or a company help support that or not, or the lack of support that exists? And so when you think about the self component, we talked about last week how people, they have that, you mentioned this earlier, the self-doubt. They may not feel confident in who they are and competent in what they do. And it can show up in the fact that, you shy away from things. You may not be the person that's in the forefront. You may be the person that just talks incessantly because you don't know what else to do. You're trying to throw out your knowledge. It's the person that could potentially become defensive. You've seen people, the moment someone asks you a question, then you become defensive about them asking you that question, when in reality, they just wanted an answer, but you've already in your head decided that they have determined that you're not qualified. So then you start reacting to what's in your head versus what's happening in the situation. And so as an individual, it's a lot of ways it can show up. We oftentimes become upset or can't relate because when you sit at the table in a corporate environment, there may not be people that look like you. And so if that's the case, you may not feel comfortable at that table because there's not representation at the table of folks that look like you. So that becomes a challenge for someone. And I think I used an example before. I spent some years in banking. And, there were not a lot of minorities in leadership roles. And so for the few of us that were in those roles, we supported each other. But when you went to a meeting, you may be the only one in the room. And so sometimes that creates some level of discomfort. And so people aren't willing to speak up. And so as a result, if that's the case, then you actually can harm yourself individually in terms of your career. When you think about the fact that, we sometimes don't own our career. We think, oh, well, somebody's going to help us. Somebody's going to do this for us. Well, the reality is you have to own your own career. You have to decide where you want to go, and you have to decide to speak up and ask for the things that you want. And so not shy away from it. We also, it can show up in ways of continually seeking outside validation. But,
okay.
Let's shift that. So that's the self side. Let's talk about from the organization side, the organization itself. Organizations. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Dr. Janine.
No. Because you are dropping these gems, and Willie is agreeing. He's saying true and amen, and all of that. You are dropping these phenomenal gems. What I wanted to do is so you are saying. So I wanted to have our listeners, viewers hear that you are saying, yes, it shows up in two ways. So you went through that individual about how it can show up and et cetera. And now we're getting ready to talk about the organizational side and corporations and others in the workplace. And when you talked about you may be the only one in the room, I'm telling you, it just brought back so many memories for me. When I started in my career, I was the only woman, and certainly the only Black woman. And I also was typically the youngest person in the room. Everybody else was older. And I constantly had feelings of, am I supposed to be here? And what do I do? And having to come over the speaking up that you talked about. So what you said really resonated. I also knew that the reason I was there was because there were no other Blacks and women in the organization, and there had been a push to get them there. So there's that side of it. So take us through that side.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, the individual and then the organizational. So when you think about the push was more in, years before, it was more about, like I said, affirmative action, less about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, some organizations may have gone through the steps, but maybe didn't put programs or processes in place to make sure that you could be successful in your career. Everything from how you hire and recruit to how you onboard your talent. And so onboarding, making sure that the talent assimilates into the organization, thinking about, does that person or should that person really have a mentor to help them? And what does that mentor look like? And if you think, you and I have talked about in our careers, we didn't necessarily have a mentor that looked like us. So your mentor may not have looked like you. And so could that person actually relate to the things you were thinking and feeling? And what does that look like? And how do you move through some of those things? And you think about companies and their hiring practices, do they have diverse pools of candidates? And really, when you think about hiring, and especially now, it's really hard to find talent. And so if that's the case, and then now you need a diverse pool of candidates, it takes even longer to fill a position. And so our organization's willing to wait so that they have that diversity in their pool so that they can hire the best person, but also that they can ensure that there's diversity in the workplace. There's data that shows that companies that have diversity at every single level, and diversity doesn't just mean black and white. Diversity means everything. It's your background, it's your education, it's your experience, all of those things. When you have that, organizations are more successful. They're more profitable. They're more productive. The people work harder. They're more innovative because you have all these thoughts coming together from different places. But when an organization doesn't take the time to make sure that that diversity exists, it also, from an imposter syndrome, it can perpetuate that, because then again, people say, hey, no one looks like me. Do I belong here? Should I be here? Maybe not. Maybe I don't belong here. And like you said, being the youngest, like you, I was very young when I started in my career and sitting at that table. And there were times you look around and you think, oh my gosh, I am really and youngest by many years. Not the case anymore though, but,
yes, it is.
Youngest by many years, right? Now young in mind and heart.
But you're bringing that wisdom. That's right. What it is. Right. Bringing that wisdom.
Right. That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. But go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the other thing is, when organizations in their performance review process, this is another way it shows up in performance review processes, men are oftentimes rated on their business skills, their business outcomes. Women are oftentimes rated on characteristics. She's nice, she smiles, a lot of conversations.
Now we're gonna have to. Now we definitely gonna have to pause and unpack that one, because that was some heavy stuff there.
Okay.
Yeah. So Willie, yes, thank you. You're still young. And I don't know if he was talking about you or me, but I'm going to take it too. And Tisha, yes, the performance review process ratings. Okay, so let's unpack what you just said about the difference in ratings, men and women, and then continue. I just want to get that gem right there.
Okay. All right, let's go back. So, oftentimes, you're sitting around a table. Companies have different processes. There may be a process of your managers evaluating you. Could be a process of you're sitting around the table and you're talking around, senior leaders are talking about the talent. And, there are observations, there's data that shows it. I've seen it where there are conversations and you talk about a man and you say, yeah, hey, he's a great negotiator. Oh my gosh, he closed that deal. Oh, wow, he can do this. He did that. He was able to bring that customer in. So again, around business results, he moved the needle. We made an X number, and profits. And then the one may be, she's a great relationship builder. She smiles.
Exactly.
She's really nice. She's really nice.
Or really put your finger on what
That's
it
right.
was
That's right.
that the woman did.
Yeah.
I don't know how she did it, but such and
But she
such and
did it.
such. Though you can articulate very specifically the
That's right.
leadership traits, successes, and strategies that a male use. So
That's
yes,
right. Yeah,
absolutely.
the male,
Absolutely.
tangible versus intangible is really what it
Exactly.
goes down to.
Mhm.
So for the woman, they're intangible because, like you said, they can't put their finger on it. For the man,
Mhm.
it's the tangible results. And so all of that, though, stepping back, all of that makes a person feel, like they're not worthy. And so it feeds into the imposter syndrome. If
Imposter
someone's
syndrome.
telling me that I don't have tangible results, and I think, am I competent? Do I know what I'm doing? Should I be here? But if someone can give me feedback and tell me what I'm doing well and where I need to improve, then I can start to think about, here are areas for me to focus on. Here's how I can manage my career and not feel like I don't belong there, because I feel like then I'm supported.
And so again, what we're saying here is that it's very clear, at least I think, in terms of what I call the two faces of imposter syndrome, that yes, we as individuals have these feelings of self-doubt, of whether or not we can do it, what have you, whether or not that's real or not. And also existing at the same time are the isms,
That's right.
whether it be the sexism,
Yeah, that's right.
or the racism or the ageism or what have you, they exist too. So it's like these two forces that are happening. And Willie, now we're gonna, yes, a woman is very smart, genius, and more. Yes, so we're gonna keep that comment up there for the rest of this conversation. Thank you, Willie. And I also saw that Kiana said that yes, she's been the youngest and first Black woman to work in the construction. And well, congratulations to you. We're so delighted
awesome.
that you that you've joined us. And yes, it is awesome.
That's
so
awesome.
Therese, so let's so you've talked about how some of these isms can reinforce the this feeling of I'm not good enough, this imposter syndrome. How does it also show up in the workplace in terms of when you as an individual, as I as an individual, am working in a team or working with others?
I think it shows up because you don't have the level of support. A very simple example: you have an idea, you put your idea on the table. You may be in this team setting, and then no one supports your idea. You sometimes it's crickets, silence. Or you put your idea on the table and they're like, yep, that's good, and they're very dismissive about it. And then someone else who may not look like you states the exact same thing. And oh my gosh, it's a great idea. Oh, wow, that's wonderful. Yes, let's do that. And so now if I'm the person that just put that idea on the table, I'm not feeling too good about myself because I didn't get support. You didn't hear me. You weren't willing to hear me, but someone else said the exact same thing. And now, oh, it's a great idea. So what happened between my saying it and that person saying it? And it doesn't matter if it's during the same meeting or it's a week later. It still was my idea that was put on the table that you let someone else take, and it's a great idea. So, I mean, there's so many ways it can show up. Just the lack of support. When you think about leaders are oftentimes not held accountable for really having fair practices and treating all employees the same. And until organizations hold the leaders accountable for doing that, the leaders don't have a reason. If they don't have a personal reason and a belief in themselves and kind of D&I, then, and I think it becomes, I also want to say, I think it becomes easy to relate to people that look like you. And in order to relate to someone that doesn't look like you have to push yourself really hard to do that. And so you have to be willing to do that as a leader. You have to be willing to expect that as an organization. And if not, then that's what happens. That's why you end up sometimes with people just not being supportive, leaders not being accountable.
Yeah, and oftentimes that takes training and acquiring new and different skills, and that's okay as we grow. And it's interesting how you positioned, well, and said very clearly, affirmative action is not diversity, equity, and inclusion. And affirmative, you reference, affirmative action is almost like, checking off the box, counting the numbers, how many are there? How many do we have? And checking, what those numbers are and what they look like. When we talk about today's world and the emphasis in the workplace on diversity, equity, and inclusion, we really are talking about those processes, those systems, the new skills, the new training and development that must occur, and that corporations and workplaces must take ownership of.
That's right.
And so I wanted to ask you, Therese, about that. So when we talk about what corporations or what employers need to do, who are we talking about and what are we talking about? Are we talking about the head? So if you have the leader, saying we're going to do this, are we talking about executives in the workplace? Are we talking about middle managers? Who are we talking about when we say corporations and the workplace needs to change?
No, we're talking about all of them, actually, when you think about who they are. But it starts at the top. What do the top leaders, the executive leaders, believe? What are they willing to support? What's the culture that they establish? Because this is about a cultural belief. It's about who you want to be as an organization. And so as an organization, if you believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, then it starts at the top, it works its way down, and then every single layer of leadership understands that this is important and that this is what's acceptable within our organization. And so therefore, we are all behaving in a way that embraces every single individual for who they are and what they represent and what they bring to the table. And we find ways to encourage them and support them and facilitate their growth along the way.
And so I know you work with many corporate execs and do executive coaching. So how does imposter syndrome show up when you're in one of your coaching sessions, or when you're talking to corporate leaders, or when you have on your HR hat as an executive leader?
Well, I mean, it shows up in the as we talked about before, in terms of what it is. It shows up in that lack of self-confidence, that doubt, and that fear. We talked about fear last week. That fear of not being willing to maybe push something forward or to challenge the status quo because you just don't feel like you have the support that you need, or you just don't feel like you're competent to do that. It's questioning your years of experience. You may have 20 years of experience. That 20-year leader says to me, "Oh, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if they're going to listen to me. I don't know if I'll be heard. I don't know if I have the support." And so it shows up in the reluctance to actually move things forward. Sometimes we will rely, I've seen clients rely on, or I've seen executives even working with them, rely on an outside consultant to tell them something, and they'll present that to the team versus their own thoughts, when they may have had a thought that was just as impactful as the consultants, or even more impactful, but the reluctance was there to move it forward. Interestingly enough, I was looking at a 360 assessment, if you know what that is. That's an assessment where a person gets evaluated by their leader and their peers and their direct reports and sometimes their clients. And it's a leadership assessment. And I was just
so everybody who's involved with the person all around.
That's
Weigh
what's called
in.
a 360. Yes, all
Mhm.
around, everyone is evaluating you. And
Okay.
I was reviewing the comments in a 360 assessment this week, and the leader of this person, the supervisor, manager of this person, said that she suffers from imposter syndrome. She really is confident, and she really should be confident, and she really is competent. And I thought, wow, how can the leader say she suffers from imposter syndrome? But then I'm thinking, so how is that showing up? How is she showing up that her leader would actually put that in the 360 assessment? So it shows up. You sometimes think people can't see things, but they can. And then you sometimes think people are seeing things that they really aren't seeing. And so it's
Mhm.
really also, as an individual,
Okay.
understanding who you are and how you show up. And you can only do that by asking for feedback, and which means that you have to be willing to ask some tough questions sometimes.
Yeah, and so it goes back to, the individual, the employee, or
Mhm.
whoever it
Mhm.
is who's there as the worker, the individual, what they need to do in
Yes.
terms of themselves. And so if you were talking to an employee
Mhm.
who said, I feel I ain't good enough, and in this setting, what would you say to that employee? What one or two things would you say to them?
Well, I'd first want to understand why they believe they aren't good enough. Um,
Okay.
Like, why do you think that? Why do you think you're not good enough? What's holding you back? What makes you feel that way?
Mhm.
And then sometimes it's understanding, like, again, we talked, last week, sometimes it's the head talk. So what's in your head that's telling you that?
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
let's try to deal with that. Let's try to figure out what's making you feel that way. And then let's identify some steps to help you move forward. And that
Right.
could be anything from, I need to seek this feedback out. I may need to speak up more when I'm in meetings. It could be, I need to have a conversation with my boss about how he perceives me, she perceives me, so that I have a better understanding of who I am in the workplace. So it really would depend on what the individual is feeling or thinking.
Mhm. But that important step of that self-awareness, you're probing, you're questioning, you're trying to, understand
Yes.
what it is that's making the person feel like that. And I do think that's an important step, and we'll get
Mhm.
more in depth and detail on this in our next conversation. But I do think the self-awareness and identifying how
Mhm.
you're feeling, how you're perceiving yourself and your action is an
That's right.
absolutely critical action to defeat, to overcome imposter syndrome.
Yes.
So now let's jump on the other side of the fence,
Okay.
and you're talking to a corporate exec,
Mhm.
and you're talking to this corporate exec who says he or she
Mhm.
believes in diversity, equity, inclusion, but perhaps doesn't understand this imposter syndrome thing, or
Mhm.
how it might play into his or her advancing a more equitable workplace.
Mhm.
What would that conversation sound like?
I'd really want to know what they're doing as an organization. What is this leader doing, and what are other executives doing that they're helping to advance individuals' careers? And what does that look like? And how do they make sure that their processes are fair and that they are equitable and that you are taking everyone into consideration and giving them opportunities, and not just giving those that have the loudest voice or those that are the most visible, not just giving them opportunities, but are you reaching back and you're looking at everyone across the organization and helping them to have career opportunities as well? So what does that look like?
Mhm, mhm, mhm. So in talking, so there are things that employers should be
Yeah.
doing in the workplace. Do you find that employers know about, have heard about, or understand imposter syndrome and how it might be affecting their employees?
No, I have found that most employers don't. I have found most executives don't know what imposter syndrome is. Actually, I mentioned to a couple of folks that I was going to be on this podcast with you. And I said, I'm speaking on the topic of imposter syndrome. And they said, what's that? What is that? And so we had to have a conversation about what it is. So I don't think that, I don't think most people, I know we say it affects or it can impact 70% of the population, or could impact you at one point in your life. I don't think most people know what it is. And if they have experienced it, they don't have a name to associate with it. And so they don't make that connection. And I definitely don't think organizations make the connection between DEI and imposter syndrome. I don't believe that happens.
But you're helping us do that. And, and I really, I found that to be the case as well. Folk can put their finger on, well, I'm feeling uncomfortable, or I'm uneasy, or I'm nervous, or, I'm feeling I'm not going to do a good job, or I wonder, well, why am I here? And we know tons of people feel that way, have said it, celebrities, folk have talked about it, et cetera, et cetera. And everyone usually can relate to that, but putting that label on it is something that, I think a lot of people don't think about, particularly employers in that context.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, Therese, we're winding down in our conversation, and I really would like for you to almost, I think what I want to say is summarize. Maybe that's summarize for us. You've dropped so many good gems, and Willie and Montez and Kianya. I don't know if I'm pronouncing Kianya. Man, and all of you who are watching have just dropped some comments. They're loving what you're saying, the advice, what you're getting, your perspective. It's really good. Oh, Asandi. Oh, Asandi Connor says, hi, Therese.
Hi, Asandi.
And so can you summarize? Can you give us like the 2, 3, you dropped a lot, but maybe 2 or 3 key ways, key points that show us, that describe how imposter syndrome and diversity, equity, and inclusion relate, and that intersection, that role, that relationship between those two phenomena, 2 aspects of life that we're dealing with these days.
Well, I think when organizations don't have representation in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, so DEI, it impacts the imposter syndrome from the standpoint of your employees don't have people at work that look like them. So who are they relating to? They have a difficult time relating to someone because there's no one there that looks like them. So that makes them not feel comfortable. So they may not feel comfortable standing up, speaking up, any of those things. The other part of that may be, the intersection is how do we evaluate, how do we help people to be successful in their career? So that whole performance evaluation piece from an organizational standpoint. Is there equity among how we evaluate our employees, and do we give them the same level of opportunities? And if we don't, then there's, the equity is not there. And also from a diversity standpoint, do we include our employees in some of the decisions that we're making, helping us to be more innovative and more creative in how we're doing things? Do we listen to their ideas? Are we open and willing to listen to their ideas? How are we hiring? Do we commit ourselves to having a diverse pool of talent before we hire someone for a position? So all of those things, those are things from an organizational standpoint, but how does it factor in? I'm not going to apply for a job if I look and there's no one in your organization that looks like me. So it's going to stop me. And then I'm also not going to think, hey, I'm worthy for that job. So because no one looks like me, I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to take a risk. I'm not going to challenge the status quo. All those things will stop me from maybe being the best that I can be because I believe I'm not worthy.
Mhm, mhm. Excellent, excellent. And there, the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace reinforces
Mhm.
imposter syndrome
Yes.
in the workplace.
Yes.
I mean, you have just put that out there for us. I love it, love it, love it. Anything else that you want to share with us before I let folk know about what's coming up next when we
Uh,
get together?
I would just say, last week, because I'm focused, I want to focus on the person, not saying you can't have an organizational impact, but for the person, I said this last week, believe in yourself, believe in what you can do, and don't always look for that outside validation, because the outside validation may or may not come, but who you are is who you are. And so trust that and work with that and develop that and grow with that.
Yes, in spite of the two faces of this conversation that we're having, the what's happening on the outside world and those
Mhm.
external realities and how they can affect you as an individual. I do believe that face, that side of how we become our best selves and how we believe in ourselves, as you say, and how we trust in ourselves. And I know Willie is constantly giving us that feedback as he's, talking about, hey, believe in yourself, grow in yourself. Exactly. And so that's why we want to give space to both perspectives. But I think Teresa and I are really probably more. We're going to be there next week when we talk about, how you can overcome and defeat
Mhm.
imposter syndrome, how you can take control and charge of it, whether you're a man or a woman. And Teresa, when this term imposter
Mhm.
syndrome was first
Mhm.
coined back in the 70s,
Mhm.
it resulted from a study on high achieving women.
That's correct.
So it's because of that focus of that study that it in at least in the early days
Mhm.
became more associated with women feeling this way. But what we've come to know is that both men and women experience this syndrome. And I think, in fact, in our conversation before, you gave us examples of men who came to you, and you coach both,
That's correct.
who came to you with the syndrome. So you would agree that it affects both men and women.
I think it affects them equally. I think that I think the difference is men are sometimes better at hiding things versus women. Women are not always the best at hiding things or moving through things, and so that's why I think focusing on solutions and how that impacts an
Yes.
individual is really key.
Right. And so that's what we're going to do in our next session. So it's going to be for men and women solutions. We're going to dive deep into solutions. And I'm so glad, Therese, you're with us to guide us through this discussion, bringing all of your expertise, your years of leadership experience, coaching, being a corporate leader, seeing this on a day-to-day basis as you work to recruit talent and bring diversity, equity, and inclusion into your workplace, and doing it very successfully. I'm so glad that you joined us again on Ignite to Impact. And yes, thank you, Willie. Look in the mirror
Love
and
that.
tell yourself you're the one that can do this.
I
And
love that.
isn't that beautiful?
Yes,
What a
love it. Awesome.
wonderful, Willie, thank you, and all the others for um, joining Therese and I on this. So, Therese, we'll see you in our next
I'll see
conversation.
you next week. All right.
Love
Have a
you so
wonderful.
much.
Love you too. Have a
Thank you.
wonderful week.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm just so delighted, as always, that you're here with us. I hope you have found value in this conversation, that you'll share it with others, that you'll follow the series that we're having, that you'll, share the replay and tell others about it. Thank you very much for all your support and listening. And if you haven't joined my email community, what are you waiting for? I'm waiting there for you. I want you to go to drgenevaspeaks.com and sign up. We talk about, a number of things that help you be your best self. Find the leader, discover the leader, enhance the leader, take that leader that you already are to the next level. Because we believe that being your best self leads to living your best life. I want you to know that when we talk next week, I'll be sharing with you some of the books that I'm writing. One is on Imposter Syndrome. I'll be ready to drop that book. So I want you to get a hold of it. I also want you to know that I've just created 3 new journals for you. All my journal lovers out there, I've got some journals for you. And, I'll be sharing all of that next week with you in our next conversation. But for those of you who are book lovers, I have a book review journal for you. For those of you who are just starting out in your business, entrepreneurs, I've got this fabulous journal on which is a business planner journal that I think you'll just love. And for those of you, my newest journal on I Love Myself and ways to keep us individually focused on being our best self. I've got that journal. And yes, all of them are now available on Amazon. And so I'll give you all the details. Thank you, Willie. I will keep the good work flowing. I do believe that we all of us can look good, feel good, do good at any age. And so I'm here to do what I can. It's my mission. It's my passion. Love you all. Mwah. See you next time. Just live it.
Ignite